Yesterday, as we were ending, we saw the Gemara's question as a question of Rabbi Shimon. We know that Rabbi Shimon has a very limited interpretation of muktzah and does not consider a ner, a candle muktzah, unless it is lit. And while it's lit, the candle is going to be muktzah because it's huksala mitzvasa, as we saw earlier, and it is dedicated to the mitzvah, and you can't move it while the candle is lit. And the Gemara challenged and said, "Why can't you move it? After all, we know that Rabbi Shimon holds that the prohibitions of Shabbos require a meleches machshavas, an intentional action, and there's no intentional action over here, because when you move the candle, even though that it's possible that when you move it, the nair is going to shake, and the oil will diminish the flame or increase the flame. But that's not your intention. You're just trying to move it somewhere, and therefore we should the rule that Rabbi Shimon has said that davar she'eino mischaven is mutter. If you have no intent, not only is it not going to be a Torah prohibition, it's mutter. It's permissible for you to do the act on Shabbos according to Rabbi Shimon. So then we should have no muktzah problem, and it should be allowed. You should be allowed to move the candle because nothing is going to happen. To which the Gemara attempted an answer to make a distinction. That there's a distinction between whether the action is going to lead to a rabbinic prohibition, a derabbanan, or whether it's going to lead to the oraisa, a Torah prohibition. And in pulling the bench, where when you pull it, you may unintentionally make a furrow, that's going to be a rabbinic prohibition, since we'll see that since over here when he's making the furrow in an abnormal way. Normally you dig into the ground, you don't pull chairs or benches in order to make furrows. And since it's abnormal, that wouldn't be a d'oraisa action in any case. Whereas if you tilt the candle and you had intent, that it would actually be a d'oraisa Torah prohibition. The Gemara is going to prove that that's not correct. That isn't the distinction according to Rabbi Shimon, because according to Rabbi Shimon, even if you're doing the d'oraisa prohibition, you're actually prohibited if you do it intentionally. Nevertheless, unintentionally, you're allowed to do it. So let's see that again. The Tani we learned what we already know that Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that when you don't do an action on Shabbos that you don't intend for an outcome that's prohibited, and it's permissible to do, because as long as it's not absolutely going to happen, the Tani, as we learned, Rabbi Shimon so you're allowed to pull a chair, table, bench, as long as you don't intend to make the charitz, you don't intend to make the furrow, and it's not absolutely going to happen, so therefore it counts as you don't intend. So the Gemara says, if you were to intend, there would be a Torah prohibition, and now you don't intend, so that is going to be prohibited rabbinically, because you're doing the action, it's just simply that you're not intending for the outcome. So the Chachamim prohibited it. However, but where you're doing an action, it's going to be rabbinically prohibited. And as this case would be, where you pull the table or the chair, that's not a normal way of making a furrow, and so there would be a rabbinic prohibition, but not a Torah prohibition. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon allows it l'chatchila even to go ahead and do it. Masav Rava, so Rava challenged that. We saw earlier in the Masechta already, that this rule of Rabbi Shimon that applies to Shabbos in Meleches Machshavas Asur Torah, that you need intent, and if you're not intending to do the action. It's just a possible outcome of the action that it's mutar l'chadchila. Also applies to the same to shatnez, as he said. You have a garment that has woolen linen in it, which is a Torah prohibition to wear. Nevertheless, if you're in the market and you're selling it, and you're trying to demonstrate the garment or as a live mannequin to the customer, you're allowed to put it on, as long as you don't intend in the summer for if it's a summer garment in order to be cool, or in the winter as a extra layer to keep you warm, then you're allowed to do it. And then we said about Tsunuin, and the Tsunuin, people that were extra careful, they would throw it over their shoulder on a stick and sort of carry it hanging on a stick. But either way, we see that since it's not an intentional action, it's permissible. And there, if you intend for it, it's actually going to be a Torah prohibition. And yet Rabbi Shimon is going to allow it l'chatchila. Over here, when he does allow, when he does have intent, it would be a Torah prohibition, and nevertheless it's allowed since it's not kila mechaven. Shor Rabbi Shimon l'chatchila. So that can't be the reason. So now we're back to the question. Rabbi Shimon says the ner, while the flame is lit on the wick and the oil in this cup, it's going to be prohibited to move. And the question is why? After all, even if you move it, nothing's going to happen because you're not intending to extinguish the flame. You're not intending to increase the flame. So what's the problem? Now we move to Mem Zayin Mem Aleph 47a. It says, don't bring me proof from the candle, the oil, and the wick, because they are hoil v'naasis hoil v'naasa basis of davar aser, because they are the basis for a davar aser, for something that is prohibited. Now, this is a fundamental part of muktzah, and we touched on it briefly, and here we're going to have a little more of it. The concept of basis. Basis means that when you intentionally place something as the foundation or the item that is holding up, it is where the muktzah item is going to be situated at the onset of Shabbos, that becomes a basis of davar aser. That becomes the basis of the muktzah and retains the muktzah status. Rashi here says a fundamental concept in basis, which is not clear to that's the opinion or the way it works according to everybody, but we're going to go with Rashi's interpretation here. Rashi says that when you have an item such as the wick, the oil, and the cup, the ner, they are all batel. They are nullified to the primary function of the ner. The primary function of the ner is the flame, and so as such, the ner's only value or only structure in this, as well as the oil and as well as the wick, are that they serve and are a part of the flame. But Rashi's word is, it's tafeloi a batel toras kli. It is secondary to the flame, and it's no and the status of a vessel in regards to in Shabbos is nullified. It is not a vessel in as much as that it services the flame, and therefore, since the flame is muktzah, and the flame is the primary thing here, the basis, that which is the base for it. So the cup services the oil services the wick services the flame, and as such, each one is a basis l'davar aser. It is a basis to a prohibited item, and it's going to be prohibited to move. Now, what we have according to Rabbi Shimon is that once the flame is gone, now you can move it. The basis only remains as much as the flame is there. Whereas according to Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda, we saw that midi this katzai lebein hashmashas, it's katzai lekula Shabbos, that once at the onset of Shabbos it was prohibited, it remains prohibited for the rest of the day.
Well, from what you just said,
Yeah.
what I'm inferring from what you said is the only heter for tiltul on Shabbos is a kli.
No. Why?
Well, you said batal is a
That's the
kli.
danger of inferring something from me, because
You said it's batal is a kli. Klape Shabbos, it's batal is a kli, and therefore you can't move it. So I'm saying, so if it
no. It's batal as a kli to the muktzah, and therefore you can't move it. It becomes a secondary and a part of the muktzah. It's not independent anymore. It's not an independent vessel. It is tafel to and batal to the muktzah. You think you have a cup and oil and wick and flame, you have one thing, a flame. It's all secondary and therefore nullified to the flame. Amar Rabbi Zeir, Amar Rabasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Zeir said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Chanina, in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi Rumnus, in the name of Rabbi Rumnus. Li hitter Rabbi letaltel machta ba'afra. Rabbi allowed for me to take a pan with coals and with its coals. They had this pan that had a cover and some holes in the cover, which and they would put some incense in there, and they would bring it in to rooms. It was a portable heater, and burnt incense, so it gave a nice smell. So these were like portable heaters. And Rebbe said that you're allowed to move this on Shabbos, even though there's ash in there. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Asi, mi Amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi? Is that really what Rabbi Yochanan said, that Rebbe allowed the moving of this pan with the ash in it? Now, the ash is going to be a muktzah. The pan is servicing the ash. But Tanan we learned, notil adam b'noi va'evan b'yadi, a kilkala va'evan b'socha. A person can pick up a child, even though the child is holding on to a muktzah item, such as a rock. You could pick up a basket, even though there's a muktzah item in there, such as a rock. And a rock is a muktzah because it's l'chazal amidi. It has no use, and it's not designated to a Shabbos use, and so it's a muktzah. But Rabbi Yochanan explained this Mishnah, the reason why you're allowed to move the basket, even though it has a rock in it, because it has a fruit in there as well. And so you have the concept of buses that we were talking about a moment ago, where the basket, where the cup it doesn't have its own independent status. It's really just servicing the flame. That's true if it's a basis l'davar ha'asar, if it's a base for a prohibited item. But if it has both a prohibited and a permissible item in there, so you have a fruit and a rock, you can't tell me that the basket is only servicing on the rock and therefore nullified to the rock, a part of the rock, and becomes as muktzah as the rock. It's also servicing a fruit. It's basis l'davar ha'asar va'umuter, both a prohibited and a permitted item. And as such, it does not take the status of the muktzah. So anytime you have a muktzah item and you have it on something that you want to be able to move on Shabbos, so if you also have a dvar heter, a permissible thing on it, then it's going to be a basis of davar aser v'davar muter, and is permissible to use, to move. For instance, you have a key ring with your house key and your car key. So that ring is a basis of davar aser, a davar mutter. So it wouldn't necessarily be a basis. Similar, they would if there was you have a Shabbos candle on the table, you want to be able to move that. So you put non-muksa items on it. So you have a siddur on it and some other, something else. So you have now the tray is a basis of davar aser, davar mutter, various ideas like that. So Rabbi Yochanan says the basket over here that has a rock in it is permissible to be used on account of that it has fruit in it. And so now it's a basis of davar aser and a davar mutter. It's a base for a prohibited and a permissible item, and you're allowed to move it. And that's the basis for moving this. Unless baperi. But what we can see is that if it does not have fruit in there, it's not permissible to use, to move. So how can Rabbi Yochanan say that you're allowed to move this tray with ash on account of that there's no muksa there? Even though there's muksa there, you're allowed to move it, but there's nothing beneficial in there. So then the tray should be basis l'davar aser, should be a base for the ash, nullified to the ash, and you're not allowed to move it. Go ahead.
So does that mean that you have to have the permitted item on the tray before Shabbos starts? Or you can put it on it?
Correct.
So if I have Shabbos candles on the table on a tray and I've got some fruit sitting on the tray also, but then we eat the fruit and all that's left is like orange peels. So now all of a sudden I can't move it anymore.
So, well, first of all, it does go by the onset of Shabbos. Remember that we talked about that that a muktzah is going to be defined for Shabbos at the onset of Shabbos. When by the time you want to move the candlesticks, the candles are out, and so you don't have the actual isser there anymore, and you also don't have the heter anymore. It's just a basis l'davar aser l'davar mutter at the onset of Shabbos. Therefore, the tray itself does not become a muktzah, because the tray is servicing both a heter and isser item, and then you're allowed to move it on account of that at the time that you're moving it, it has neither on it. You have a couple of issues in your particular scenario. You have to know whether the candlesticks and the fruit are going to be a good match. Because if you have a basis l'davar aser that's primary, you have a very valuable and important item, and you have a toothpick, right? So that's not a basis of davar aser, davar mutter, because relative to a Shabbos candlestick, two Shabbos candlesticks, the toothpick is a non-entity. So that's it has to be somewhat comparable. It has to be somewhat valuable. That's A. And B, once you have peels on it, peels themselves are a muksa. We'll see later a tray of shells. The shells are a muksa. So what do you do? How do you move it? And we'll discuss more about that.
What if you like your phone on top of a chumash?
Which you shouldn't do, right?
Well,
Because it's a safer kodesh, right? You shouldn't.
Right, but you come Shabbos, you said, who left the phone in the chumash, right?
No. Oh, okay, fine. Sorry. All of this is by intention. Shachach. If you forget something on it, that doesn't become a basis. That's not the base for something. We're talking about where you placed it.
Okay.
Well, shachach, where you forget something, and that doesn't make it a basis. It's when you place something somewhere. So now that defines it as its service. You put an item in a specific place, a muktzah item in a specific place, that services the muktzah item. You forget something there, that's not gonna count as a basis. In any case, so he asked him, how can you say that Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that you can move the ashtray with ash in there? It's a basis. as we see, he only allowed to move the basket with a rock in it on account of the fruit. V'yamar, so he was silent for a moment. He was thinking about it. Amar, he said, "Hachanami this bekartin." Must be that we're talking about that it still has some of the pellets of frankincense, of the incense, and therefore it's still a usable tray. Amar Abaye, what are you talking about? Kartin be Rebbe michashivi. Rebbe, he was a nasi. He was the prince. He was wealthy. There's a couple of good coals left in the midst of the bad coals. You think he's going to start sifting through the ash for a few kartin? Is that really valuable? And it depends on the person. Of course, it's only going to count as a davar amuter, as a basis, as the base for a good, for a prohibited and permitted item, if the permitted item is actually of value. And if you're going to tell me, well, for other people it's a valuable item, yeah, but it's all relative to the person we're talking about. But Tanya, as we see similarly in regards to Tuma, big day aniyim la aniyim, big day ashirim la ashirim, we see that clothing that pertains to, we know the halach of muktzah is that, the halach of Tuma is that if the garment, the patch of clothing is 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, it's going to count as enough of a garment in order to still retain its susceptibility to Tuma. If it's to a poor person who can use it as a patch, for a wealthy person, it would have to be large enough that it would serve as a kerchief, and therefore it would have to be 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim. So big de aniyim la aniyim. A garment for poor people counts as a garment in regards to poor people. Big de ashirim la ashirim. Avad aniyim la ashirim loy. But a patch, which is a garment for a poor person, for a rich person, that's not a garment because he's going to toss it. So same here. If Rebbe's going to toss the kartin that are in the ash, for him, a tray of ash that still has a little bit of kartin in it, that doesn't count as a valuable enough item to be considered a basis or davar amuter. It's not going to be a permissible item. Ella, Amar Abaye, Mida have a graf shorei. So Abaye said, no, the reason is something else. Not because this is a basis for ash and kartin and incense, so it has a permissible and prohibited item. But rather, this is the basis for this is that it's just disgusting to leave around. It's disgusting to leave around. As Rashi says, it's not sightly. You don't want to look at a tray of ash in your room. And as such, you're allowed to move it. Now, the concept of graf shorei is what they used to have, like a bedpan. Ray is bodily waste. And a graf shorei is a bucket of that. And so therefore, you're allowed to move that on Shabbos. It's most, even though that it is muktzah. But nevertheless, you're allowed to move it because you can't leave it around. It's not covered Shabbos. Amar Rava shtei tshuvas b'davar. So Rava says, and we're on 47a, Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Amar Rava shtei tshuvas b'davar. Two responses to you, Abaye. Number one, the graf shorei mois. The graf shorei, the bedpan, that's disgusting. It's not just unsightly to have some ashtray around. It's disgusting. V'hai loimos, but an ashtray is not. V'oid graf shorei migli v'hai mirsi. And besides, the graf shorei is uncovered. This has a cover on it. As we said, this ashtray was basically a personal heater with incense in it that they would bring into the room. It had a cover. The cover had holes for the incense to come out. Elam Rava said that's not the basis for the heter of carrying the ashtray. Rather, Kiavina Be Rav Nachman have metaltalina kanuna agav kitma. So this was this kinuna, this ashtray, this personal oven. We would carry this. We would bring it and carrying it in because of the ash itself was usable. Why? They would pull out some of the ash and they would cover spit. So it had a service. The ash itself was usable because you assume that the ash was muktzah. Actually, the ash is not muktzah because it has a use. It may be somewhat muktzah, but the point is that it was brought in with a particular use, and therefore it's permissible. And now, even so, then if it's permissible, so what's the chiddush? Why do we have to say, oh, he brought in a permissible thing, a tray full of ash? Why does Rabbi Yochanan have to say, Rebbe permitted for us to carry this? Of course, if you have a use for ash on Shabbos to spread it, so then it's not a muktzah. So that's what he says. No, even though that it had some wood chips in there, and that's a prohibited item, it's a muktzah, because what use do you have for wood chips on Shabbos? You can't make a fire on Shabbos. That's a Torah prohibition. So that's the only use that you're going to have of the remaining coals and wood chips in your ashtray. So obviously that's a muktzah. So it wasn't the ash that was muktzah. The ash actually was the permissible item. It was a service item that you needed in order to cover spit. The wood chips is what was the muktzah item. And even though it had muktzah in there, it was permissible because it was a basis of davar aser, the wood chips, and a davar amuter, the ash. Mesave. We ask a contradiction. We see that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon both agree, even though that Rabbi Shimon says that you're allowed to carry a candle, the candle cup that the flame is extinguished already. And Rabbi Yehuda says you may not because it was already muktzah at the beginning. And maybe even that the cup is disgusting. But both agree you cannot carry this if it has some wick left in there, some broken wicks that you can still use. It's going to be a muktzah because the wick, there's nothing that you can do with on Shabbos. And so it's a muktzah for the rest of Shabbos, and if there's a valuable wick in there, so then it's a muktzah. So why? But you have ash there. No, that's talking about in Kollel, where you're not going to toss the wick. As Rashi says, they had a hard time. Getting flax, linen, in order to make wicks. And in the north, Tues disagrees. Tues said that they had a lot of flax there. But either way, Rashi says that it was on account of that they had a difficult time getting wicks, and therefore they would save broken wicks. And to them, it was a valuable thing, but it was muktzah, and as such, that was primary, and it would be a basis of davar asar, and you're not allowed to move. Levi bar Shmuel, Ashkechina Rabbi Abba Rav Huna bar Chia, Davakaim Pischa de Rav Huna. They were in front of the house of Rav Huna. Amalu, he said to them, Ma'u lahachzim mita shel tarsiyim b'Shabbos. Are you allowed to put together a tarsiyim bed? These are basically travelers' beds that would come apart, and you would put it together wherever you came to, and then you take it apart. So basically a camping mat. Amru le shaper dummy. So they said to him, yeah, you're allowed to. Also a comment of Yehuda, and there's Rashi says the question was based on the concept of makab patish, completing a vessel, completing making something final touch in order to make it usable. And he said, no, that's permissible because it's made to come apart and put together. Okay, also commented Rabbi Yehuda when he came in front of Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Harav Shmuel Damar Tavayu Hamachzim Mita Shel Tasim Shabbos Chayv Chatas. He said, no, Rav and Shmuel both said that somebody puts together such a portable bed is actually transgressing a Torah prohibition, and they have to bring a chatas. They have to bring a chatas offering for having transgressed. Mesave. So we ask a contradiction. Hamachzeh kana menorah b'Shabbos chayv chatas. Somebody who puts the candelabra arms back into the candelabra on Shabbos is completing a vessel, and is chayv chatas, transgresses on a biblical level and has to bring a chatas. Kanei saidin lo yachzir. The painters would have a regular length painter's stick, and then they would have an add-on to make it longer for the to reach the corners. So that attachment you shouldn't attach on Shabbos. But if you do, vim hichser potter, it's going to be you'll be exempt of the chatas, aval aser, but it's prohibited rabbinically. So what's the distinction? Rabbi Simai Omer, Karen Agula Chayiv, Karen Pshuta Potter. Similarly, musical instruments, a twisted horn, putting together the parts, is going to be Chayiv, is a biblical prohibition. In a straight horn, a flute-like thing, Potter, it's going to be prohibited, but rabbinically. So what's the distinction? So how can over here we see it's going to be prohibited. There we say that a meat of tarsium is permitted. In who Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Chia, they say they follow this opinion. The Tanya milbenes amita v'kares amita levachim shel skivos. So you have these legs, small legs underneath the bed. It was basically a protector for the bed legs. So it was a cup that they would put the bed legs in. So their floors were made of ground soil, and if you had a bed on there, so the bottom of the beds would rot, and so they put the legs in this protective thing so that you would put it on. And Levachim Shel Sekivas, which was a part of the bow, and that they would place the bow in as sort of as a stand, and a bow and arrow. So lo yachzer, don't put these in on Shabbos. Vim hichzer potter, aval aser. If you put it back, even though it's prohibited, you will not bring a chata. So in other words, it's rabbinically prohibited. So now we're on Amud Beis. But make sure that you don't make them firmly placed by putting in a peg, according to Rashi. You're putting in a peg to keep it in place. That would be a Torah prohibition. If you put it in permanently, sort of very strongly with a peg, then it is a Torah prohibition. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, no, even if you put in a peg, if that peg is loose, it just keeps it in place, but it isn't it's not jammed in, but rather it's just there as a placeholder so that it doesn't slip off, but it can shake in there. It's soft. It's loose. That's permissible. In either case, they have a source that you see that putting together parts of a bed, as long as it's loose and as long as it's not permanent, it will be. It's going to be exempt. You're not going to have a Torah prohibition. And so they follow Reb Shimon Gamliel, who says it's permissible. They had a bed of the Galil, which Rashi says was a similar bed to the Tarsium, which was this portable bed that comes apart and you put together again. And he would put it together on Yantiv. So this Chacham said it to Rava, and in one of the versions here it says to Rav Chama. My daitach binyamin atzadu. What do you think, that this is not a proper structure because it's not firmly set in, because it's sort of not firm, and so it's not a solid structure. Fine. So you didn't transgress a biblical prohibition. Well, we're not Sadducees, we're not Saddukim. and you transgress the Rabbana. Amar lei anakar b'shem gamliel severely. Amar emayarafu muter. No, I did not transgress because I follow the opinion of Rishim ben Gamliel, and he says that as long as it's loose, there's no. Not only is there no biblical prohibition, there isn't even a rabbinic prohibition. It's permissible to put it together. We're going to continue with the next Mishnah with the concept of bitul kli me'achana. And in the previous Mishnah, we saw the placement of a cup underneath a dripping oil candle in order to collect the oil. Here, you're putting a vessel beneath a fire that that is sending off sparks. Some of the wicks tips are falling off, and as such, you have a danger of fire. So you want to put a vessel beneath there with water in there to receive these sparks and extinguish them. So you're allowed to put a vessel beneath the candle to receive these sparks, but you're not allowed to put water in there because that's extinguishing. Putting a vessel that's empty, receiving the wick and allowing the spark and allowing it to go out on its own, that's fine. Whereas if you put in water, that's going to extinguish it, and that you're not allowed to do. So Gemara asks first, this vessel is going to become batel. It's going to become nullified to the muksa that's in it, the fire that falls into it. And you're not allowed to, as we saw earlier, you're not allowed to remove the usability of a vessel, whether it because the vessel becomes unusable, as we saw, and therefore it's like you deconstructed the vessel for the Shabbos, or you made the vessel permanent in its place because you can't move it. And with various versions of what Rashi said, the reason is. But either way, you're not allowed to do this, and if you do it, you have transgressed a muktzah of putting a usable vessel underneath to receive a muktzah and making the vessel no longer usable. Amar Rabbi Huna b'Rei Rabbi Yeshua, and it's the same man mamish. No, these sparks have no consistency. They're there for a second and then they're gone. And so you're not. What are you telling me, that I'm not going to be able to move this vessel, and therefore it's as if it's permanently there? Or I've deconstructed the vessel because it has no usability anymore because there's a muktzah in it. That muktzah is there for a second and then it's gone. But nevertheless, you're not allowed to put water into there because you are extinguishing. This is like Rabbi Yossi. In regards to putting a vessel full of water, an earthenware vessel full of water in front of a fire, in order to stop its spread, where the vessel is going to explode, and then the water is going to spill. The earthenware vessel will explode on account of the heat, and then the water will spill and extinguish the fire, which Rabbi Yossi prohibited because you're causing kibui, you're causing the extinguishing of a fire, which is a Torah prohibition, and you're causing it. Even though it's not directly your action, Rabbi Yossi says that's prohibited. The Amar gram lekibu aser, gram kibu according to Rabbi Yossi is going to be prohibited. If it is bereim, the Amar Rabbi Yossi be'erev Shabbos miyomer, and we challenge, say, Rabbi Yossi, did he really prohibit this before Shabbos? He only prohibited on Shabbos. You can't take a vessel full of water and put it in front of a fire, because on Shabbos you're causing the extinguishing of the fire. But prior to Shabbos, I can put those vessels there. And so over here, why can't I put a vessel with water underneath my my sparking candelabra before Shabbos? If you tell me, well, who told you we're talking about before Shabbos? Maybe our Mishnah is talking about on Shabbos I can't put in water. But before Shabbos, I could put a vessel there with water. No, that's not true. Vatani, we learned the Brisa clearly states, you could put an empty vessel to receive these sparks on Shabbos, Erev Shabbos, and I didn't have to tell you. You can do it before Shabbos and let it be there. But you can't put water into it because it will extinguish these sparks. May Erev Shabbos, even Friday, I can't do it. Shabbos, I don't have to tell you can't do it on Shabbos. So if this is Rabbi Yossi, it doesn't fit either. So what's the reason for our Mishnah? Elam Ravashi, rather Ravashi says, you know why you can't put in water? Even the Rabbanan who over there said that you can put a bucket, earthenware bucket of water, which will explode and then the water will extinguish the fire. Over here would agree you cannot. Here you're actually making the spark extinguish early. The earthenware vessel, there you're not doing anything, it's happening on its own. Here you are putting water, which means that the spark falling will hit the water versus the floor a moment earlier than it would have, and you're extinguishing it early, and that counts as your action of extinguishing the fire. You're only allowed to do it in a manner where it'll hit the bucket, it'll hit the earthenware vessel, and extinguish on its own. You didn't do it. With this, we complete the third parak, Parakira, and we should come back to you, Be'ez Hashem as well. We start the new parak, Bameton. Here we're going to talk about a continuation of what the previous chapter began with, preparing food before Shabbos to remain hot on Shabbos. The previous Mishnah, the previous parak began with the halachas of keeping food on a stove. Do you have to cover it? Can you put it back on the chazara? Here we're talking about, I want to retain the heat in my pot, so I'm going to put it in an insulated area. What insulation may I or may I not use? So the concept is that you're allowed to insulate something in a davar she'ein mosav hevel, in something that will not be a conductor of the heat itself, will only serve as an insulator for the pot to retain its heat. That I can do before Shabbos. But something that will become itself a source of heat, is something that itself will become a conductor of heat, I can't insulate in that. And the reason is because, as we saw earlier, since it's an insulator that actually increases the heat, you may even put something that's not fully cooked in there and then try and reheat it on Shabbos, or because you're trying to keep it very hot. So, what can I insulate with, and what can I not insulate with? Ein tominin, lo begefes, not with sediment, v'lo bezevel, and not with dung, v'lo bemelach, and not with salt. And here we'll see what type of salt. V'lo besid, and not with lime, v'lo bechol, and not with sand, bein lach and bein yavation, regardless of whether it's wet or dry. V'lo beteven, not with straw. V'lo bezagin, not with wine sediment, which is basically this wine seeds and wine peels. V'lo bemuchen, and not with cloths, shmatas. V'lo be'asavin, and not with grass. And all this list that we're talking about is only if it's wet. Bizman shein lachin. If you have wet shmatas, or wet grass, or wet straw, so all those things, that would be the water is what would be the conductor of heat. But you may use shmatas, etc., if they are dry, because then it would not be a conductor of heat itself. And tomorrow morning, Be'ez Hashem, will continue with the Gemara on analyzing what type of sediment are we talking about and what's a conductor of heat.